The Vaughn Triangle. Across the vast expanse of the American Southwest, there are stretches of highway that seem to exist outside the ordinary flow of time and space. Roads where travelers vanish without explanation, where the laws of physics bend in ways that defy understanding, and where those who survive their journeys return with stories that challenge everything we believe about the nature of reality. These are not tales confined to folklore or distant memory. They are contemporary accounts, documented with precision, investigated by authorities, and corroborated by multiple witnesses who have no reason to fabricate what they have experienced. One such road cuts through the high desert of New Mexico, a lonely ribbon of asphalt stretching between the small towns of Vaughn and Corona. For decades, this 47-mile corridor has been the site of incidents so strange and so consistent that locals have given it a name that speaks to their unease. They call it the Devil's Corridor, and those who know its reputation avoid traveling it alone after dark. The phenomenon of mysterious disappearances along remote highways is not new to the American landscape. Route 66, the extraterrestrial highway in Nevada, and countless unnamed backroads have all accumulated their share of strange tales over the decades. Yet what distinguishes the stretch of US Route 285 between Vaughn and Corona is not merely the number of incidents reported, but their remarkable consistency. Witnesses separated by years and circumstances describe the same sequence of events with unnerving precision. The pattern begins almost always in the same way. Travelers notice their vehicle's electrical systems beginning to malfunction without apparent cause. Dashboard lights flicker and dim. Radio stations dissolve into static regardless of frequency. GPS devices freeze or display impossible locations. Then comes the light, a brilliant illumination that appears first as a distant glow on the horizon before intensifying with terrifying speed. Those who have survived encounters along this stretch of highway speak of what follows with voices that still tremble years after the fact. They describe a presence, something vast and inexplicable that seems to exist just beyond the threshold of human perception, something that watches from the darkness of the desert night. The modern history of the Devil's Corridor can be traced back to the spring of 1975. Though local ranchers insist, the strangeness predates any official record by generations. On the evening of April 17th of that year, a truck driver named Raymond Ortega was making his regular run from Albuquerque to Roswell, carrying a load of agricultural equipment. Ortega was an experienced driver who had traveled this route hundreds of times over the previous decade. He knew every curve, every mile marker, every place where the road dipped and rose with the contours of the high desert landscape. The night was clear, the moon nearly full, and visibility extended for miles in every direction across the flat expanse. At approximately 11:40 p.m., Ortega was driving through the most isolated section of the corridor, roughly 15 miles west of Corona, when his truck's headlights began to dim. Within seconds, the interior lights followed, fading until the dashboard was barely visible. The engine continued to run, but the power steering became heavy and unresponsive. Ortega pressed harder on the accelerator, but the truck began to slow despite his efforts. Then he saw the light. It appeared in his rearview mirror first, a soft amber glow that he initially mistook for another vehicle approaching from behind. But the light grew brighter with impossible speed, transforming from a distant point to a blinding radiance that flooded the interior of his truck cab. Ortega later told investigators that the light seemed to have texture, almost like a living thing that pressed against the windows and seeped through every gap in the vehicle. The heat was immediate and intense. Within moments, the temperature inside the cab became unbearable. Ortega rolled down his window, gasping for air, and that was when he heard the sound. He described it as a deep, resonant humming that seemed to vibrate through his chest and skull, a frequency that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. The truck had now rolled to a complete stop, its engine silent, though Ortega had never turned off the ignition. The radio, which had been playing country music moments before, now emitted only a rhythmic pulsing sound that matched the tempo of the humming that filled the air. Ortega reached for the door handle, some instinct telling him he needed to get out, to run. Though where he would run to in the middle of the empty desert, he could not have said. His hand touched the metal handle, and a shock of static electricity jolted through his arm with such force that he cried out in pain. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The light vanished, The humming ceased. The temperature dropped back to the cool of the desert night. Ortega sat in the darkness, his heart hammering in his chest, his breath coming in short gasps. After several minutes, when nothing further happened, he turned the ignition key. The engine started immediately, all systems functioning normally. He put the truck in gear and continued driving, accelerating until he was traveling well above the speed limit, desperate to put distance between himself and whatever had just occurred. When he reached the truck stop in Roswell nearly an hour later, he discovered two things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. First, according to his watch and every clock at the truck stop, it was now 2:15 a.m. More than 2 hours had passed, though his conscious memory accounted for perhaps 20 minutes at most. Second, when he climbed down from his cab and walked around to inspect his truck, he found a series of circular marks burned into the paint along both sides of the vehicle. The marks were perfectly uniform, each one approximately 6 inches in diameter, arranged in a precise geometric pattern that suggested intelligence and purpose. Ortega reported the incident to the New Mexico State Police the following morning. The officer who took his statement was professional, but clearly skeptical, making dutiful notes while offering conventional explanations for each element of Ortega's account. The electrical problems could have been a failing alternator. The light might have been another vehicle with unusually bright auxiliary lamps. The missing time was likely a misreading of his watch, perhaps caused by stress and fatigue. As for the burn marks, they could have been there for days and Ortega simply hadn't noticed them before. The driver accepted these explanations with a weary nod, understanding that his story sounded impossible even to his own ears. Yet he knew what he had experienced, and no amount of rational explanation could erase the memory of that light, that heat, that sound. In the days that followed, Ortega found himself avoiding the route he had traveled for so many years. When his employer assigned him loads that required passage through the corridor, he requested reassignment, eventually taking a pay cut to drive less profitable routes. His colleagues noticed the change but said nothing, respecting the unspoken rule among drivers that some roads develop a reputation for good reason, and a man's decision to avoid them should not be questioned. What Raymond Ortega could not have known, as he struggled to process his experience, was that his encounter was only the beginning. Over the next 2 decades, dozens of similar incidents would be reported along the same stretch of highway, creating a pattern so consistent that it would eventually draw the attention of researchers from around the world. In the summer of 1983, a family from Texas named the Hendersons were driving through the corridor on their way to a camping trip in the mountains near Santa Fe. David Henderson, his wife Patricia, and their 2 children, ages 9 and 12, left El Paso in the early afternoon, planning to reach their destination before nightfall. As they entered the isolated stretch of Route 285 west of Corona, their daughter Sarah mentioned that she felt strange, as if the air pressure in the car had suddenly changed. Within minutes, both children were complaining of headaches. Patricia reached back to check Sarah's forehead for fever when the car's engine began to sputter. David pulled to the shoulder as the vehicle lost power completely. They sat in silence on the side of the empty highway, no other traffic visible in either direction. The light appeared from above this time, descending from the darkening sky like a star falling to earth. It moved with purpose, slowing as it approached until it hovered directly over their vehicle. The interior of the car became as bright as midday, despite the gathering dusk outside. David tried to open his door but found it somehow locked from the outside, though he could see no mechanism preventing it from opening. He tried the window switch, but nothing happened. The electrical systems were dead. Patricia began to scream, pulling the children close to her. The light intensified further, becoming so brilliant that they had to close their eyes against it. Through their closed eyelids, they could still see the glow, a white radiance that seemed to penetrate straight through flesh and bone. David later described a sensation of weightlessness, as if the car and everyone in it were being lifted, though he could not be certain whether this was actual physical movement or some kind of perceptual distortion. Then came a gap in consciousness, a discontinuity in the flow of time that none of them could adequately explain. One moment they were sitting in their car on the side of the highway, with the light overwhelming their senses. The next moment they were driving again, the car moving at normal speed, the sky fully dark with stars visible in every direction. David's hands were on the steering wheel, though he had no memory of starting the engine or pulling back onto the road. They drove in shocked silence for several minutes before anyone spoke. When they did, it was to compare notes to try to understand what had just happened. They discovered that while each of them remembered the light and the sensation of being somehow suspended, their individual experiences diverged in significant ways. David recalled seeing shapes moving outside the car, silhouettes that suggested humanoid forms, but with proportions that were subtly wrong. Patricia remembered a voice not speaking in words, but somehow communicating directly with her thoughts, telling her not to be afraid, that they would not be harmed. 9-year-old Sarah described being taken somewhere else, a room that was both cold and bright, where she lay on a table while something examined her. 12-year-old Michael remembered nothing beyond the initial appearance of the light, his memory containing only a blank space where time should have been. When they finally reached a gas station in Santa Fe, more than 3 hours behind schedule, David checked the car thoroughly for any sign of damage or evidence of what had occurred. Like Raymond Ortega before him, he found marks. These were not burns, but indentations pressed into the roof of the car, 5 circular depressions arranged in a pattern that suggested a hand or claw, though larger than any human hand could account for. The metal was not torn or scratched, but compressed, as if enormous pressure had been applied to specific points. David Henderson filed a report with local authorities, providing photographs of the marks on his vehicle and written statements from each family member. The incident was logged and filed away, added to a growing collection of similar reports that law enforcement in the region had been accumulating for years. No investigation was conducted beyond the initial report. No follow-up questions were asked. The file was simply archived, one more impossible story in a database full of them. The family cancelled their camping trip and drove straight home to Texas. For months afterward, both children experienced nightmares. Sarah would wake screaming about lights and voices. Michael developed an intense fear of the dark that required therapy to address. Patricia became obsessed with researching UFO phenomena, filling notebooks with accounts from other witnesses, searching for patterns and explanations. David refused to speak about the incident at all, becoming silent and withdrawn whenever the subject was raised. 5 years later, the family would divorce. Patricia, citing the trauma of that night as the beginning of the end, the moment when something broke inside their family unit that could never be fully repaired. By the early 1990s, the pattern of incidents along the Devil's Corridor had become too consistent to ignore. Researchers specializing in unexplained aerial phenomena began making regular trips to the region, interviewing witnesses, examining physical evidence, and spending nights monitoring the highway with an array of detection equipment. One such researcher was Dr. Aline Fitzgerald, a physicist from MIT who had become interested in UFO reports after analyzing radar data that suggested objects were regularly performing maneuvers that exceeded the capabilities of any known aircraft. Dr. Fitzgerald established a monitoring station in Corona, equipping a small trailer with magnetometers, radiation detectors, infrared cameras, and electromagnetic field sensors. She recruited a team of volunteers to help maintain round-the-clock surveillance of the corridor, hoping to capture objective data during one of the mysterious incidents. For 3 months, nothing unusual occurred. Equipment functioned normally, recording only the expected background readings of a remote desert environment. Then, on the night of September 23, 1992, everything changed. At 10:47 p.m., every instrument began registering anomalous readings simultaneously. The magnetometer detected a massive distortion in the local magnetic field, fluctuations that should have been impossible without industrial machinery or natural geological phenomena nearby. The radiation detector registered a spike in gamma radiation that lasted for approximately 40 seconds before returning to normal levels. The electromagnetic field sensors recorded frequencies that oscillated rapidly across the entire detectable spectrum, creating patterns that Dr. Fitzgerald later described as almost musical in their complexity and precision. The infrared cameras captured something even more extraordinary. The footage showed a heat signature descending from the sky, an object that registered as much hotter than its surroundings, roughly oval in shape and perhaps 30 feet in diameter. The object hovered over the highway for approximately 2 minutes before accelerating upward at a speed the cameras could barely track, vanishing from view in less than a second. During those 2 minutes, a vehicle passed directly beneath the hovering object. The car's headlights dimmed visibly on the footage, and the vehicle appeared to slow almost to a stop before continuing onward. Dr. Fitzgerald immediately dispatched team members to intercept the vehicle, hoping to interview the driver while the experience was still fresh. They found the car parked at a rest area 15 miles east, the driver sitting on a bench outside, staring at the sky. Her name was Jennifer Cortez, a nurse from Albuquerque heading home after a shift at a hospital in Roswell. When approached by the research team, she initially seemed confused, uncertain of where she was or how much time had passed. Slowly, with patient questioning, her story emerged. Cortez remembered her dashboard lights failing, her car losing power, and then the appearance of the light. She described it as unlike any artificial illumination she had ever seen, more like concentrated daylight, compressed into a beam. The light surrounded her car completely, and she felt a pulling sensation, as if the vehicle were being drawn upward. She recalled a moment of panic, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her foot pressing uselessly on the brake pedal. Then there was a gap, a discontinuity in her conscious experience. Her next clear memory was of driving again, pulling into the rest area, though she had no recollection of having made the decision to stop. When Dr. Fitzgerald asked if she would consent to a medical examination, Cortez agreed, still trying to process what had happened. The examination revealed something that both confirmed and deepened the mystery. On Cortez's left forearm was a mark that had not been there before, a small circular indentation, approximately 1 centimeter in diameter, with the skin around it slightly reddened. The mark was not painful, but when touched, Cortez described a tingling sensation that spread up her arm. More significantly, a blood test revealed elevated levels of certain hormones associated with extreme stress, and trace amounts of an unknown compound that Dr. Fitzgerald's equipment could not identify. The substance was organic, but unlike any naturally occurring biochemical marker in the human body. The physical evidence, gathered that night, represented the most significant data ever collected. During one of these incidents, Dr. Fitzgerald submitted her findings to multiple peer-reviewed journals, including the raw sensor data, the infrared footage, and the medical results from Jennifer Cortez. The response from the scientific community was mixed. Some researchers praised the rigor of her methodology and acknowledged that the data suggested something genuinely anomalous had occurred. Others dismissed the findings, suggesting equipment malfunction, misinterpretation of natural phenomena, or even deliberate fraud. The debate continued for years, with Dr. Fitzgerald defending her work while facing increasing skepticism from colleagues who felt she had damaged her professional reputation by engaging with fringe topics. Eventually, she ceased her research along the Devil's Corridor, not because she doubted what she had documented, but because the academic cost of continuing had become too high. The monitoring station was dismantled, the equipment returned to MIT, and the project was quietly closed. Yet the incidents continued, unaffected by the presence or absence of scientific observation. In the years since Dr. Fitzgerald's research ended, the Devil's Corridor has maintained its reputation as one of the most consistently active sites for unexplained aerial phenomena in North America. Local residents have learned to accept the strangeness as a simple fact of geography, something as natural and inevitable as the summer thunderstorms that roll across the high desert. Many who live in the small towns along Route 285 have their own stories, encounters they rarely share with outsiders, but discuss among themselves with the casual familiarity of people describing the weather. There is Maria Sanchez, who owns a gas station in Vaughn and claims to have seen the lights more than a dozen times over the past 30 years. She describes them as curious but not threatening, comparing them to animals that observe from a distance without approaching. There is Thomas Begay, a rancher whose land borders the highway, who reports finding his cattle arranged in perfect geometric patterns on multiple occasions, the animals apparently unharmed, but clearly moved by some force during the night. There is Father Michael Cordova, the priest at a small Catholic church in Corona, who has counseled numerous parishioners traumatized by their experiences on the highway, helping them process encounters that challenge their understanding of reality and their place in the universe. What makes the Devil's Corridor particularly intriguing to researchers is not merely the frequency of incidents, but their consistency across decades. Witnesses separated by years describe the same sequence of events, the same types of lights, the same electrical disturbances, the same missing time. The phenomenon shows patterns that suggest something more than random occurrence or misidentification. Some researchers have theorized that there may be something about this particular location, some quality of the geology or atmosphere or spatial relationship to other features that makes it conducive to whatever is occurring. The area sits at a high elevation, roughly 6,000 feet above sea level, with clear skies and minimal light pollution. It lies along a relatively straight path between several military installations, including White Sands Missile Range and Kirtland Air Force Base. Some have suggested the incidents may be related to classified military testing, though this fails to account for reports dating back decades before such facilities existed. Others point to the region's proximity to Native American lands and ancient ceremonial sites, suggesting a connection to spiritual or metaphysical forces that predate modern technological explanations. The missing time phenomenon, reported by so many witnesses, presents perhaps the deepest mystery. Those who experience these gaps in consciousness often describe similar after effects, fragmented memories that surface gradually, dreams that feel more like recollections than fantasies, and a persistent sense that something significant occurred during the unaccounted hours, even when conscious memory remains elusive. Some have undergone hypnotic regression, hoping to recover what was lost. The results have been consistent but troubling. Under hypnosis, witnesses frequently describe being taken aboard a craft, subjected to examinations by entities that appear humanoid but distinctly non-human, and engaged in some form of communication that transcends verbal language. The beings are typically described as tall and thin, with large eyes and gray or pale skin, matching descriptions that have become almost archetypal in UFO literature. Skeptics dismiss these regression accounts as the product of suggestion and cultural contamination, arguing that witnesses are simply reproducing imagery they have absorbed from popular media. Yet the witnesses themselves, many of whom had little prior interest in or knowledge of UFO phenomena before their experiences, remain convinced that what emerges under hypnosis represents genuine memory rather than confabulation. The question of why these incidents continue, what purpose they serve, and who or what is responsible remains unanswered. Some believe the Devil's Corridor serves as a kind of observation post, a location where non-human intelligence monitors human activity and occasionally interacts with individuals for reasons we cannot fathom. Others suggest the phenomena may be interdimensional rather than extraterrestrial, manifestations of realities that exist parallel to our own and occasionally intersect with our world in specific locations. There are those who maintain that government agencies know far more than they publicly acknowledge, that the incidents are documented and studied in classified programs hidden from public scrutiny. And there are skeptics who insist that every incident can be explained through conventional means: misidentifications, hallucinations, hoaxes, and the human tendency to find patterns in random events. What cannot be disputed is the testimony of hundreds of witnesses over 50 years, people from diverse backgrounds with no apparent motive to fabricate their accounts, all describing experiences that follow remarkably similar patterns. Today, the Devil's Corridor remains an active site of unexplained phenomena. Travelers still report electrical disturbances, missing time, and encounters with lights that behave unlike any conventional aircraft. The highway itself shows no signs of the strangeness that has made it famous. By day, it is simply another stretch of desert road, unremarkable in its emptiness and quiet. But as darkness falls and the last light fades from the western sky, the corridor transforms. The darkness becomes absolute, broken only by the stars overhead and the occasional headlights of passing vehicles. It is in these hours that the mystery persists, waiting for the next traveler who will glimpse something impossible and return forever changed by what they have witnessed. For those who know its reputation, the Devil's Corridor represents a threshold between the known and the unknown, a place where the boundaries of reality grow thin and permeable. Whether the phenomena will ever be fully explained, whether the truth will emerge from the shadows of speculation and doubt, remains uncertain. What is certain is that the mystery endures as present today as it was 50 years ago, waiting in the darkness of the New Mexico desert for the next witness to its impossible secrets.